On the 1st of August 1960, 56 years ago, the Internal Security Act came to force. I don't know whether somebody just thought 1st of August is a good day, or there was somehow some intentional intention to evoke the ghost, which never leaves us off the Internal Security Act. So we have an act that's come into force on the 1st of August, 56 years after the Internal Security Act. And as Dato' Amiga has said, many of the wordings are closely related to the Internal Security Act. Another thing that is, another connection with the Internal Security Act is the very fact that the National Security Council Act needed to be in place simply because the Internal Security Act was abolished. It was, some people talk about SOSMA and POTA and POCA as being the new Internal Security Act, but to me, I think it's this act that really is the successor to it. And it may have actually come about by an act of omission, what I call the oops factor. We suddenly didn't realize what was going on. Let me just give you a very quick, but admittedly it's going to be a bit confusing rundown to this. This is Article 150, sub 7 of the Federal Constitution. And it basically says, I'm not going to go through the words of all, it basically says that if you have a proclamation of emergency, then of course you pass laws under that proclamation of emergency. And then Parliament can of course revoke that proclamation of emergency. And so Parliament in Malaysia, of course, has two houses, the Dewan Rakyat and the Dewan Negara, the House of Representatives, the Senate. So, and to us, when you say Parliament has revoked, it's basically when the last of the two houses has revoked the proclamation of emergency. So you will recall that when our Prime Minister, our beloved Prime Minister, announced that he intended to abolish the Internal Security Act, he also said that Parliament was going to annul or revoke all the three existing proclamations of emergency. And so Parliament did this roundabout, the Dewan Negara was the last house, did this roundabout December 2011. Okay? And so under Article 150, sub 7 of the Federal Constitution, all laws that were made under that proclamation of emergency expired 6 months after the proclamation has been revoked by Parliament. And so basically all the laws made under any of the three proclamations of emergency would have expired round about the end of June 2012. And so because there were laws that were made under the proclamation of emergency, I think the Attorney General's chambers had to go through the laws and to check to see what laws were made under the proclamations of emergency, which had to be reenacted. Because if it's not reenacted, it's lost, right? So you don't have the law anymore. So just to give you an example, this is a flavor, an example, one of the things that we did under the proclamation of emergency was to define what our territorial sea was, the border of our territorial sea. And this is the explanatory note of the Territorial Sea Act of 2012. And it says, basically, seeks to provide for the territorial sea of Malaysia to replace the Emergency Essential Powers Ordinance, Basically, it's just recounting the fact that the original legislation, as it were, that defined the territorial sea of Malaysia was done under emergency proclamation, and therefore, since the emergency proclamation had expired and the 6 months was ticking away, they had to pass this. Okay? So this is one piece of legislation as an example to prove the point that I'm making to you that laws had to be reenacted. Another law that had to be reenacted was the RELA law, Ikatan Relawan Negara. Okay, that was also done under emergency proclamation, and so they had to reenact a RELA law. Okay, so there we are, the dates. So Dewan Rakyat annulled or revoked the emergency proclamation 24th November, Dewan Negara 20th December. So by the 20th of December 2012, all these laws were going to be of no effect unless they were reenacted. Okay? So this is basically a very convoluted. We had a lot of problems with emergency legislation because things kept expiring and things kept being challenged in court and being held to be unconstitutional. So there's a lot of laws that were passed to reenact laws and to make it retrospective. So you have a law that was passed in 1979 to basically make good or legitimize laws that were made after 20th February 1971 because of some technicalities. So there are lots of back and forth. I mean, if you talk about, you being confused about Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3, this is basically a little bit of that in legislative form. There's a lot of going back to the future, trying to make sure that all dates sort of square up. Okay? Okay, so I won't go through them. But basically, one of the things that went along with all this was the creation of the National Security Council. National Security Council was established by an act of a cabinet decision on the 7th of July 1971. And it was made law by basically, where is it now? Emergency Essential Powers Ordinance number 2 of 1969. That was the law that created the National Security Council. So I think one of the things that was overlooked, that's why I call it the oops factor, one of the things that was overlooked was the fact that as of 20th of June 2012, when all the emergency legislation expired, except anything that was reenacted, the authority for the National Security Council expired as well. So from 21st of June 2012 until the 31st of July 2016, the National Security Council, which didn't close shop by the way, was basically operating without any cover of legislation. It had no legal authority. So one of the things that the Act specifically provides for in Section 43 is to save everything that was done by the National Security Council prior to the coming into force of the Act. So if you look at Section 43, it basically says anything that was done by the National Security Council that was formed by the federal government prior to this Act is saved. And any rules and any regulations in Section 44, any rules and any regulations that were also made remain in force. So I think that was one of the critical things as to why there was a need, at least in the initial period, to rush to try and pass this legislation. The fact that it had to save the National Security Council that was operating without any cover of law. Okay, the other thing which is interesting to note, and that's what Mika touched about it, is that the executive authority of the Federation lies in the Yang Tuan Agong. That is set out in Article 39 of the Federation, of the Federal Constitution. What's very interesting is that if you go back again to the proclamations of emergency, right? One of the proclamations of emergency basically recites the fact that executive power resides with the Yang Tuan Agong, but for the purposes of the emergency, it is now being delegated to a National Operations Council. So this is where all the powers of the Yang Tuan Agong, legitimately held by him under the Constitution, is then therefore delegated to a National Operations Council. And so authority over, and this is how it's connected, authority over defense, Article 41 of the Federal Constitution, Yang Tuan Agong, the Supreme Commander of Armed Forces. So that is the executive authority held by the Yang Tuan Agong under the emergency proclamation. It is then delegated to the National Operations Council, and that's how the National Operations Council during the emergency had control, operational control over the armed forces. There was a very clear flow. If you fast forward to today, what we have is the National Security Council having operational conduct of the police and the armed forces. But the question is, where is the delegation? There is no legislation, there is no regulation that passes the authority of the Yang Di Tuan Agong to the National Security Council. So this to me is a violation of the Constitution, because you have not explained how is it that suddenly, out of the blue, a body called the National Security Council suddenly has operational control over the armed forces. And I think this is something that Colonel Dowd and others brought this to light for us to understand that where the chain of command has been disrupted, but there's no legitimacy, there is no legal document that provides for that switch in the chain of command. And then again, we talk about the Armed Forces Council having also some oversight over the armed forces, and the role of the Armed Forces Council is totally overlooked in the course of the National Security Council Act. So that's another feature that I think is quite important. The third issue is the role of the rulers, and again, Dr. Ambiga has cited this. I just want to expand that slightly further for us perhaps to fully understand. The National Security Council Act does not provide for the need to go to the Yang Di Tuan Agong to say, Tuan Khoo, there is an emergency, there is a security threat in the country, you need to declare and proclaim a state of emergency. It doesn't do that. It basically says National Security Council advises the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister so decides he is the one. So the question is, why should we have in a country two different formats, two different frameworks for dealing with national security? The Constitution already provided for one. We are creating something which is, one could argue, extra constitutional, not anticipated by the Constitution. And we have to argue whether or not that makes it in and of itself unconstitutional. Of course, I as a lawyer would argue that it is, because you are detracting, you are subtracting from what is already provided in the Constitution, and you are creating an alternative mechanism. And ladies and gentlemen, that is essentially what it is. It's an alternative mechanism. It's a mechanism that is devoid of the constitutional protections that have been carefully built into our federal constitution. So you have the National Security Council. You have a whole bureaucracy that is created by the Act. And you have the Prime Minister who's in charge. And the Prime Minister appoints members of the National Security Council. So it's not as though there's an effective check and balance that the Prime Minister is there, but the composition of the National Security Council is decided by someone else. And if you look at the ministerial composition of the National Security Council, the holders of all the ministerial positions of the National Security Council all belong to one political party. So let's forget coalitional politics. All the key designated ministerial positions in the National Security Council are currently held by members of one political party. That makes you think, what is this all about? What is so difficult about going to the Yang Di Tuan Agong and asking Tuan Khoo to declare a declaration of emergency? Well, very fundamentally, that is one of the things in the Constitution that is in his absolute discretion. There are certain things in constitutional law that a constitutional monarch has to abide by the advice of his Council of Ministers. Those of us who have grown up in a constitutional monarchical system will understand that. There are certain things that if the ministers go to the monarch and say, we advise your majesty that this has to be done, he or she has to do it with no discretion. But in the declaration of an emergency, the Constitution gives the Yang Di Tuan Agong the discretion, personal discretion, to decide whether or not to do so. So the question must clearly arise that one of the possible reasons, I say this as a possibility, one of the possible reasons to to avoid the need to go to the young Tuan Agong is the possibility that the young Tuan Agong may not agree with you. So imagine the Prime Minister going up to Tuan Khoo and saying, Tuan Khoo, I think we'll have to call it an emergency. And Tuan Khoo says, I don't think so. I don't think there's a real emergency. Or I think that this thing can actually be sorted out by a less draconian method. I don't have to declare. The Prime Minister cannot force Tuan Khoo to declare because it's in his personal discretion. And if you look again at the line of sultans in our constitutional rotating monarchy, look at who will be the young Tuan Agongs to come. We are slowly seeing a generational change. We are moving away from the sultans in their 60s and 70s and 80s, and we are going to the sons of that generation. And maybe younger men, unfortunately they're all men at the moment, younger men have different views. Maybe they want to flex their muscles. Maybe they want to be a little bit more independent. Maybe they want to disagree with the Prime Minister. And this would be one of the ways in order to do so. And so one of the ways to avoid this from happening is to set up this alternative structure where you don't have to seek the consent of the young Tuan Agong. You just do it on your own. And you totally sidestep the whole institution of the monarchy. And I think that's quite important for us to understand. Some of us have different views about the role that the monarchy should play in our democracy. But this is something that the Founding Fathers felt was important, and as a lawyer, I can see the wisdom of that. And so I can see the danger, conversely, of avoiding that check and balance. The other check and balance when it comes to the royalty, as I pointed out earlier, the young Tuan Agong is the supreme commander of the armed forces. But in following on from the British tradition, a lot of their Royal Highnesses are honorary colonels-in-chiefs of regiments in the armed forces. And in the Malay tradition of loyalty and obedience to the monarchy, you can imagine a tension where the military is being forced to do something without the consent or the agreement of their regimental colonel-in-chief. And so you see, possibly again, because I was not there, I was not a fly on the wall, one of the reasons why the Conference of Rulers sent back this piece of legislation and said, rethink this, could have been because it compromised or potentially compromised the relationship between their Royal Highnesses and the military. And the last thing we want to do is to jeopardize that very relationship. But instead of saying that they will, well, they said they will look into it, but then nothing changed, right? But so instead of doing that, they go ahead and they push through the legislation and they use Article 66 of the Constitution, which was amended by Dr. Mahathir to basically say if you don't consent within 30 days, then it's deemed that consent has been given. So you could argue that this issue, in a sense, had its birth many, many years ago, long before we would make the connection between that and the national security issue, whereby Dr. Mahathir had already set in place the motion, the ability for there to be a reason to ignore the wishes of the institution of the monarchy. So these are some of the issues. And then finally, let's go to some basic fundamental human rights issues. A lot of the provisions that allow for the National Security Council to operate violate the very fundamental liberties that the Constitution guarantees. Things like Article 5, liberty and the right to life. Things like freedom of movement, things like freedom of association are all jeopardized by the National Security Council, because by having permission or the ability to go into a security area and to ignore any need for warrants to be able to go and search and seize without any warrant makes it a fundamental violation of the very provisions of the Constitution. And even Article 13, the right to property, is jeopardized by the fact that under an operational order of the National Security Council, the police force, the military can go in, can seize your property, can even order for its destruction. Sure, you get compensation, but guess who you have to apply to for compensation? The Director General of the National Security Council Department. He is the one that's heading the department that's breaking down your house. And he's the one that you go to say, can I please have compensation? I mean, if there ever was a conflict of interest, this is it. Why should I award you high compensation when it's my folks, my fellas, that are doing this job of destroying your home or your property? And then just before I got up here, Eric very helpfully gave me a copy of some of the regulations that have been passed under the National Security Council Act. And I just want to read to you one section of it. And this is the National Security Council taking temporary possession, land, building, or movable property, demand for use of resources, and destruction of building or structure, regulations 2016. Bit of a mouthful. But let me just say what I think it's the definition of property. Just bear with me for a minute. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm going to read to you from the National Security Council prohibited actions and activities within security area regulations 2016. So these are the things that you cannot do in a declared security area. So actions and activities prohibited in security area, this is regulation 3, a person shall not, and there's paragraph A and paragraph B and C. I want to read you paragraph B and C. A person shall not possess any supplies for which he cannot satisfactorily account in circumstances which raise a reasonable presumption that the supplies are intended for the use of any person who intends or is about to act or has acted in a manner prejudicial to public security or the maintenance of public order within the security area. And then C, provide, whether directly or indirectly, any supplies to any other person in circumstances which raise a reasonable presumption that that other person intends or is about to act or has acted in a manner prejudicial to public security or the maintenance of public order, or that the supplies so provided are intended for the use of any person who intends or is about so to act or has so acted in a manner prejudicial to public security or the maintenance of public order within the security area. Okay, lots of verbiage. What does that mean? Well, if you look at the definition of supplies, supplies includes money, food, drink, clothing, medicines, drugs, and any other stores, instruments, commodities, articles, or things whatsoever. So, as Dr. Amiga has posited, the NSC can be used to stop Bursay 5. And if the Secretariat of Bursay 5 starts stocking up t-shirts in their office, and that office area is declared a security area, then the mere storing of t-shirts or mere storing of bottled water or anything of that sort can be, because it's so widely defined, can be deemed to be supplies, the holding of supplies, the providing of supplies, which is contrary to the National Security Council regulations, thereby committing an offense for which you can go to jail. So the fact that these things are so broadly drafted and there's no clear-cut definition, what is a security threat? What is, in fact, what's even national security? I think Lam Chun Wai, somewhere around here from REFSA, last year when he gave a presentation, he very correctly questioned, where is the definition of national security? If the National Security Council Act had stopped at Part 3, which talked about the setting up of a National Security Council and the role of a National Security Council, we will not be here. Because what goes from Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3, I think is perfectly acceptable to most of us in terms of the setting up of a National Security Council and advising on issues relating to National Security Council. But unfortunately, it goes on to Part 4, which creates this whole mechanism, and Part 5, a whole scheme of operations of how the National Security Council can conduct and carry out operations that extends the scope of the National Security Council to becoming an operational force, which then has such huge and unchecked and uncontrolled powers. That is a concern that any civil libertarian, any man or woman with any sense of what is fair and just would outrightly reject. And I certainly totally call for the repeal, it must be, the repeal of the National Security Council Act. And we as concerned citizens, we as caring citizens, if we love our country and if we love democracy, this is something that we must vigorously oppose. Thank you very much.